This episode of The Biggest Table is brought to you in part by Wild Goose Coffee. Since 2008, Wild Goose has sought to build better communities through coffee. For our listeners, Wild Goose is offering a special promotion of 20% off a one-time order using the code TABLE at checkout. To learn more and to order coffee, please visit wildgoosecoffee.com. And now, my conversation with Liz Bucar. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Biggest Table. I am your host, Andrew Camp. In this podcast, we explore the table, food, eating, and hospitality as an arena for experiencing God's love and our love for one another. And today, I'm joined by Liz Bucar. Liz is a religious ethicist and professor of religion at Northeastern University, as well as a certified Intensati and Kripalu yoga instructor. Her popular writing has appeared in The Atlantic, The Los Angeles Times, Teen Vogue, and The Wall Street Journal. She is the author of 4 books, including the award-winning Stealing My Religion and Pious Fashion. She lives in Brookline, Massachusetts. So thanks for joining me today, Liz. It's great to connect.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Andrew. I'm excited to talk about food. I love eating and food, so
Awesome.
It'll be fun.
It will be. And so you have a new book coming out called Beyond Wellness, How Restoring the Religious Roots of Spiritual Practices Can Heal Us.
Yeah.
So before we sort of really dive into this book, I'm sort of curious a little bit more about your story. You're a religious ethicist. And so what's your love of religion and, like why exploring religion and,
Wow. Okay. This is going to take us way back into this is a little bit of a long story, but so I'm a religious studies scholar kind of by mistake.
Okay.
Which is how all the great stuff happens in my career, I think. Every book I've ever written is kind of a mistake too. Like, oh, I'm writing this book. So I come to it, I'm baptized Catholic, but I was raised Congregationalist Protestant, sort of. I left, wasn't really very active in the church after middle school. I have a pretty religious mother, non-religious father. My partner now, he's Jewish. I sort of consider myself non-religious affiliated. So I'm a nun, N-O-N-E-S, I guess,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So that's sort of my personal sort of relationship to religion. But my intellectual, so that's the beginning of my story of religion. I'm going to tell you kind of about Beyond Wellness. So I'm changing my relationship to religion. But why am I a professor of religion that's a sort of by mistake thing. So when I left college, I was doing nonprofit work in DC, and I was working on issues of reproductive health and public health in Latin America. And I was like, whoa, religion is a big factor in this. I need to understand, just know what the hell is going on.
Right.
I need a lot higher level of religious literacy, particularly Catholicism, than I had at the time. Just because, it's not as easy as the Catholic Church is against abortion or contraception, right? It's a much more complicated picture. So I was working for a group at that point called Catholics for Choice, which is a pro-choice, pro-access to reproductive health organization. It works, globally, but especially in Latin America at the time. And I applied to graduate school in public health, law, and religion. I was all over the place. And I started a religion program not planning to do a PhD. I don't come from a family of academics. Being a professor was not on my bingo card.
Right.
And I started at the University of Chicago and deferred law school. And I just was no, I love this. These systems are so complicated and interesting. And when I realized that they were fine with me not being a Catholic moral theologian without having to step into a tradition, they were you could be a comparativist. So that's what I was. I studied many traditions. And that sort of it brought me was pragmatic reasons, right? I want to fight social injustice. Religion is a factor, both positive and negative.
Yeah.
I got right. So that's at the beginning of my career. And I did a lot of work in the Catholic Church, but also in Shia Islam, and I'm kind of a big comparativist. But I think my career, my interest in religion, that intellectual interest and that personal interest have sort of shifted. I don't know, maybe this is a midlife thing. I'm 52 or whatever, or maybe it's what the world is demanding of me right now. But I think that my new book, Beyond Wellness, I'm being much more into, it's very personal for me. It's thinking about studying religion all these decades, studying religion that's not my own all these decades, has really taught me something about what I think human flourishing is, my own sort of helped me get a sense of my own core values, my own sense of right, wrong, what I can imagine for like a better life or world. I'm really informed by religious communities and traditions I'm not part of, right?
Yeah.
And this new book is me being like, okay, if you're non-religious affiliated, or if you're outside some of these traditions, but you kind of like want to engage some of their wisdom, what does that look like in an ethical way, right? So my book before this one was a book about cultural appropriation of religion. So like kind of like, maybe don't do that. Like, or if you do that, just know there are consequences, there's harms. And this new book is like, okay, fine, I made you feel guilty. Now, like, where do we go from now? Go from here, right?
Right.
Like, what do I do if I'm like, I just think there's so much I'm missing as a non-religious affiliated person? How can I use these religions as conversation partners?
Hmm.
And today I assume we'll talk about food, but my book has 7 different case studies, right? One
Yeah.
is food.
Yep.
And food is a great example because religious communities think about not just what to eat, but like how to eat. And
Right.
the wellness culture that I've been studying just is not thinking about that, right? So here, let's have this conversation about with these different religious traditions. Let's both see like how has religion done us a little dirty in
Yep.
terms of food and diet culture in the US? Because
Yeah.
there's a
Yep.
story there,
Yep.
right? Let's be honest, it's not all roses.
No.
And then also, right? But then also like what's the counter Christian conversation, but what's also the some of the resources from other religious traditions that can help us really, like you said, like eat well and have that be
Yeah.
part of human flourishing in a deeper way.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a
I
long
love this.
story.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate it just because it does like, the theoretical aspect is important, but I love hearing the story of what's drawing people into why they are doing what they're doing,
Yeah.
right? Like there's a
Yeah.
deeper story, and no, I appreciate what you said, and you really hit on some key aspects because I think we are all in this moment. Even before we started recording, we all, we were joking that everything's a hot mess right now.
Everything
um,
a mess. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the world is demanding something of us in this moment, and I
Yeah.
think one of the questions and the wisdom that religion can bring is, okay, what does it mean to flourish, and what does it mean to not just flourish individually but flourish communally? Like what does it mean to live a good life for the sake of others?
Yeah. I
uh,
think that's a really important. I mean, I think that's one of the big takeaways of my book is that like if you try to think about wellness as
yeah
this individual pursuit of like optimizing yourself or bodily perfection or longevity, you are missing a big part.
yeah
We're collective, we're communal, and religions have really always centered that. So that's like a nice little pushback. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah and so
Yeah,
you begin your book with the introduction of why the spiritual salad bar
yeah,
isn't actually helping us,
yeah,
and even sort of the um, promotional blurbs, it talks about that it may be satisfying our hunger, but it's actually not nourishing us. And I think
yeah,
there's an important delineation between the two. And so help us like understand, because there is this idea, and we've been told, I can be spiritual but not religious.
yeah,
And I think, there's some wisdom in that, but there's also some harm. And I think again, you're wanting to nuance, help us
yeah.
understand the good and the bad. And so help our listeners sort of, what do you mean by that? Like, and help. Yeah.
Oh, so much. So I forgot there's so many food metaphors throughout the book.
Yeah.
Now you have the book talk, right? So the salad bar, and then what you sort of said, it's like maybe like it's sort of like empty calories, right? Like it's
Yeah.
like not really satisfying us. Really, it's not really nourishing us. It's like the bag of junk food. So yeah, I have in mind when I'm writing this book not only like spiritual, not religious folks, but I think also those of us, or maybe perhaps like a lot of your listeners who see themselves as part of a Christian community, but are kind of still like dabbling in the
Right.
religion of others, right? And this has a long history. This is nothing new, but I think we're in a particularly interesting moment because if I think about my students, my Zoomers, my Gen Zers, they are really, really interested in spiritual techniques and practices from other communities. A lot of them are pretty resistant. So when I say salad bar, like they want to pick and choose
Yeah.
what they like. Like I don't like cottage cheese. I don't want cottage cheese on my salad. I don't eat like spinach. I want romaine lettuce and I want chickpeas. Or they want what they want.
Yeah.
They want what they've like been told will work for them, often
Mhm.
by an algorithm, right? And they want to personalize it. They don't want to order off the menu. That's a salad bar, right? They don't want to
Yeah.
be a Presbyterian or they don't want to be a Reformed Jew or whatever. So that's what the salad bar sort of fits in. And they also don't really want religion, a lot of them. So
Yeah.
they would say that that's not religion. They're like, no, 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 it's spirituality. No, no, it's harmless. It's the good stuff, not the religion. The religion is institutions and um, clergy abuse scandals and power and all the stuff that we don't like, right? All the stuff that many people are deconstructing, right? As they've
Right.
left churches and communities. And that's like all fair and all accurate. Like I say, religion has a PR problem, but it deserves that PR problem, quite frankly, right? But I'm interested in like, well, what did we leave behind when we just said, no, I just want some things from the spiritual salad bar? And, I think that and that nourishing sort of like not really nourishing, not really getting us to flourishing is part of what I personally feel when I engage these practices and what I sort of tried to trace out through the book that like, yeah, you can do a technique. It's like, let's take another technique in the book, like mindfulness meditation.
Right.
If it's removed from some of the religious content of it and context, a couple of things can happen. One is you may be doing something that you don't know how it's remaking you, and that might be a problem. Like you may be doing something, a meditation and mindfulness is a good example, with the conception of the self, there is no self. And you're like, oh, but I'm trying to optimize myself by being mindful. And suddenly you're like in this existential crisis because you've been like rejecting yourself and you're like, now what, right?
Yeah.
But you didn't know that because you just went to the salad bar and put the cottage cheese on your plate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that not having religious literacy when we engage in these techniques that really have their origins in religious traditions and communities means we don't know what we're getting ourselves into.
Yeah.
And if this stuff is like powerful enough to heal us and change us, which I think it is, it's also powerful enough to hurt us. So I like want people to like go in with their eyes open, I guess.
Yeah.
That's part of it. I just think that like knowing more about the religion. I mean, I'm a professor, so I'm always about more education is better. But the more you know, I think the more you can figure out how these practices can add more purpose and meaning to your life, be more socially engaged, work better for you. Like that's really what I'm interested in. Like if you're interested in mindfulness, would an understanding of the lineage your practice comes from make it work better for you? Yeah. So that's sort of where I think that we left too much on the table by just So there's another metaphor. Too many food metaphors. No. We left too much on the table. We walked away at the end of the meal.
Well, and you touch on it that it's giving us these dopamine hits.
Yeah.
Like sort of like our technology does, but without actually a deep-seated community.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Some a quote I like by Houston Smith is that he's talking about the psychedelics in this context. He's like, they're really good at creating mystical religious experiences, but not a religious life. So it's like maybe they're like giving you like a little bit of like a taste of like wellness and flourishing, but not like how does it change your life, right? Like sort of the 360, how does it actually lead to something? I mean, the book is called Beyond Wellness because I think wellness is too low of a bar. I want real flourishing, which I don't say flourishing because that sounds like a religious word to people. I say well-being. I want real well-being. I want something bigger and deeper, and so not always easy and perfect and optimized, and it's not all good vibes. Sometimes there are bad vibes, right? Human flourishing involves bad vibes too. So I think we just it's like we've made instead of thinking about human flourishing robustly, we're sort of like we're like living here, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, this is a podcast. We're living low. We're living at this level, and I want to like think about what would it be to live a little higher in terms of that complexity. And I
also thought of it in terms of like the idea of aspect of control of like, when we're picking and choosing, we want something controllable.
Yes.
Or, where we can manage the results, but really like the world demands, and we experience that higher level or, resonance or, flourishing in terms of uncontrollability, which I think religion, I think in a Christian worldview, I've experienced Jesus in moments where I release control, and just allow something to come in.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we are chasing, and hey, fair enough. We're chasing things that are predictable and controllable, given what we said about the world right now. I get that, right? And if I think about my students, my own teenager, I see that especially for young people, right? That like, I just need something that I can control, and food is a way to control our lives as well. But that in a different chapter, the chapter I write about AA, I really focus on the idea about that one thing I really have learned from religion is the like decentering of our own sort of like agency, but also power like that.
Yeah.
So the AA lesson that we are
Yeah.
not God is a great lesson. Like
Hmm.
who had to learn it again, that we're just not in control. We're not God. We cannot, no matter what you do, you cannot life hack your way to what you think, you cannot control things, because you can do everything perfectly and still have, a health diagnosis, for example, or something happened to a member of your family, or lose your job, or your country goes to war, all kinds of things
Right.
can happen. You're not in control.
No.
So, yeah. Yeah.
And do want to talk about the chapter on food, eating well, how religious foodways can heal toxic diet culture.
Mhm.
So toxic diet culture, like you have these phrases that you're just like, they're jarring and they make you like, you know, defensive, but in a good way of like, hey, wait, what, and so what do you mean by toxic diet culture?
Yeah. So I think that in if I stick with like America right now, I think we think about food really problematically. And I think that's one of the discourse you see about um, GLP-1s. I make sure I get that right. Not that those don't work and aren't great for people, but I think it's building on this idea too. So I think that in the wellness industry, for example, there's an obsession on eating what we eat, and that there is a perfect diet, and that perfect diet, again, about what you eat, what you put on your plate, and how when you eat it, and will, again, is the ultimate life hack. It'll lead to bodily perfection. If you think about, I think about this in gender terms. For women, it's often about beauty and longevity. Not, it's about beauty and thinness.
Yep.
And the masculine, not that masculine isn't also affecting women, but also this idea for, I think the masculine side of that is like peak performance, right? Like peak performance in the gym. Like, so I'm someone who lifts heavy weights, right? So I got to have my like carby snack before I go to the gym, and I got to eat 40 grams of protein by the time I get back. And if I do that, the muscles will work, So this
Yeah.
idea that like, so there's this idea that the diet, there is like a perfect diet for us. And if we do it, and we're never ever doing it perfectly, so it's all this shame. If we do it, we like optimize ourselves. But I think that the way we talk about food is really problematic. And I think I start with the example of like eating disorders, which have
Mhm.
touched so many women in my own life. But I also say that disordered eating, I don't really know hardly any women actually who haven't been affected a little bit with disordered eating thoughts. I think a lot of that, and it's not, and actually eating disorders are becoming more and more common among young men. My friends who are in the clinical space are saying, particularly food aversions is becoming really, really um, very, very common in young men. And I see that, like, so I see this like, I sort of try to trace it historically. So I think there's this um, moralizing of food is part of it.
Yep.
So like some food is good, some food is bad. I can't eat bread and pasta. Bread and pasta is bad for me. Versus like, so like moral, and that we can talk about, that has some like religious roots. So there's that piece of it. There's the asceticism piece of it. Like the more I have self-control, or the less amount I eat, the food restriction, right? Like the Brian Johnson who is biohacking his life by not eating anything after 11 a.m. every day. Every single day of his life. That is his life.
Wow.
No.
No.
Right. So there's that. So there's like for valorizing food, this like asceticism, right? Like that I can restrict. And then the third piece of it is the like valorizing thinness. And that thinness is healthy, and so the bodily particularly for women, that bodily perfection looks a certain way. And I think that leads us to like being scared of eating some foods. It certainly leads to anxiety. I mean, I think it leads to eating disorders, but even without an eating disorder, it just leads to like disordered eating, where we can't enjoy breaking bread with each other because we're not supposed to eat bread because we've been told bread is bad for us, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
all these things, and creating all this like noise about food and all this shame about food. Instead of thinking about what would it be like to eat well together, to savor, to sacrifice fine, but also savor. So I think that we're in a period where like there's always a new diet, right? Like right now, again, I told you I'm 52. Right now I'm being told eat as much protein as possible. You have to eat 100 and whatever, 50 grams of protein every day, or you're going to wither and die, and your hips, you're going to fall and break your bones. And this cyclical too, right? Like, so my mother-in-law is still living in the world where you eat skim milk and margarine, right? Like,
Right.
so like,
Yeah.
whatever that was, right? And I still have friends who eat sort of like, paleo or keto or something. So it cycles, but right now we're in this like, and it sort of overlaps with the Maha movement too, right? Where we're
Hmm.
like a lot of purity, pollution stuff, right? Natural food, detox your body. Your body is a problem to be solved. It's like full of toxins from the
Yeah.
environment, or it's full of like bad hormones or bad cortisone things, and the food will fix that. If you could just find
Yeah.
the perfect diet, right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you touched on that diet, because it's like every week, month, the diet restrictions change, or I'm told to do certain things, or the food pyramid, is just inverted. And so now we're like, okay,
Red
wait,
meat
what?
and like whole
Yeah.
milk.
Yeah. And so we're constantly bombarded, and we're constantly told this or that. And then, like you mentioned, we have celebrity influencers, that live a very privileged life, who have access to certain things that, I may not have access to, that, and they're doing this and telling us this is the way that we can optimize our health. And so it's always led to this idea, you know, we as America have always it feels like we've always struggled with, how do we eat well? Like,
Yeah.
and we've never answered that question, because of the beauty of our culture being intermixed and mingled, and we're, come from multiple places, and, that dietary rules didn't come over, or the, eating habits and culture didn't come carried over. And so we're always like, we never know what to do.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think that's right. I also think I kind of blame it a little bit in the there's like a historical piece of the
yeah.
chapter where I say, if you want to think about like how we got here in America, it was a particular problematic combination of three different sort of forms of like Christian theology. And I want to say
Yeah.
that I don't think that Christianity is a problem, because I actually think there are terrific resources for stewardship and like thinking about food and communal. Like, there's actually, some organizations that sort of
Yeah.
I think I'd probably footnote the book, but I do think there can be bad Christian theology, right?
Yes. Yes.
Right. And so if you take like, and again, I sort of focus on the asceticism thing. So if you think of someone like, medieval female saints who restricted so much that they starved at the age of 30, and they were like praised as being pious and, overcoming their body, because the body is a problem that we need to
Right.
solve. And it's, our spirit is how we're like angels. Our body is like how we're like animals.
Yeah.
That idea, right? So it's not like there was actually a diagnosis, like, right, it was miraculous in anorexia. So what is that in Italian? I mean, in Latin.
Yeah.
Mary Alice, or my Latin's terrible. It's not the same thing as anorexia nervosa that we have now, but it's based on this same sort of like pressure on, particularly it was gendered, right? Of like,
Mhm.
women's bodies being controlled, or women controlling their own bodies to push back on the control from the outside, right? Like, well,
Yeah.
I know this from talking to people, young women with eating disorders, that like, this is the thing I can control, as like,
Mhm.
school is stressful, applying to college is stressful, my sport is stressful, socially it's stressful. I can control what I put in my body as I'm trying to be this perfect, young woman. So there's that. And if you take that and you combine it, so that's not necessarily about thinness, but it is about restriction, right?
Right. When it's based in a misconception of body, and so like it's dualistic and
Yeah.
separating our physicality, which Jesus declared good, from
Right.
our spiritual. So
Right.
yeah.
Right. It's not the only Christian way of thinking about
Yeah.
the body, but it's
No.
like a strand. And if you
Yeah.
combine that, then with the moralizing of food, and I
Yep.
do want to blame some, like in terms of making that go mainstream in the US, moralizing of some food as good and bad, it has, that is itself like a religious move, right? It's like
Mhm.
pure, this thing is pure, this thing is polluting, this thing
Yeah.
is natural, this thing is toxin. So that Mary Douglas I talk about in the book has a
Mm.
great way to think about that. Like, there's no reason why this food is bad unless it breaks some like, rule that you've made. And there are examples of like Protestant minister. So Sylvester Graham's a great example, right? Who like promotes the graham cracker, but also promotes this vegetarian, non-alcoholic, non-meat, whole grain sort of diet, which is all great during, a cholera outbreak, but in a way that's like, because that thing is sinful if you eat that thing.
Right.
And that thing is pious, right? So suddenly you have categories of food as like, That
Mhm.
now we're kind of flipped it right now. Meat is the pious thing. The more meat you can eat. So that more. So if you combine that like bad body dualism, now we're going to layer on some of this moralizing of food, and then you get to people like Gwen Shamblin, who are like the thinnest Christian diet culture, who are industry, who are like,
Yeah.
you don't get to go to heaven unless you're thin.
Right.
Which is totally new, right? Sylvester Graham wasn't about people being thin. He just wanted people to be like pious. He didn't want them to like be sexually promiscuous either, right? He was just like kind of a moralist. But Gwen Shamblin was very clear. She's like, you gotta be skinny. You want to get through those gates, you gotta be skinny. And if
Yeah.
you're not, if you're gluttony is a sin. And if you're overeating, if you're not eating the right thing, if you're not thin, it's because you are a sinner, right? So
Yeah.
So now you have, if you put those three things together, that's part of why we don't eat well. And those
Yeah.
things, when I say that those are problematic forms, problematic Christian interpretations of Christian theology, I would say,
Yeah.
but they all go mainstream. They don't even look Christian anymore.
No.
Right? Like moralizing food. You think about the Maha movement, when we talk about pasta being bad for you, which is something that like people say. My father-in-law will not eat carbs right now. He says he won't eat carbs, and for him, a carb is a grain, is any kind of grain.
Yeah.
So when you say that a grain is bad for you, that doesn't sound to him like a Christian thing, but like it feels to me like a Christian thing, right? So it's like these things go mainstream and they become sort of normalized that we don't even realize there's some theology behind it.
Mm-hmm.
The thinness too. The thinness thing is like, who decided that like my BMI was good, whether or not I was a good or bad person? That was a reflection of my character. My grandma used to say things like that. She used to say things like that would make you think that if you were 10 pounds overweight, it was a reflection of your character, right? 10 pounds, you know?
Yeah, right.
If grandpa just get back down 10 pounds to his like same weight he was in college, I was like, it's like grandpa, he's 95. Let him eat what he wants. You know, so that I think there's a reason we're bad eaters. And partly it's this like way in which versions of sort of Protestant theology, mostly Protestant theology, kind of go mainstream. They just kind of get hidden away and they get accepted as like, oh, that's, of course, there's good food and bad food. Of course, like thinner is a thin person is more in control of their like desires and their impulses. Of course, that's better. Of course, you know.
Yeah. I came across your work through your highlighting of Anna Rollins' work, Famished, and she's been a guest, and so she really does tell the great story of what role her fundamentalist upbringing played, and
everyone should read her book. It's great because it's also from her first person point of view of like, this is what it did to me, and I could and
that's.
But what's interesting about that though, Andrew, when I read that and I read her, then I think about my own daughter, who is not Christian, did not grow up in a Christian household, and is still affected by all this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Right? You don't have to be part of the church to have this affect you and have this make your eating disordered in some way. Or just, even if not disordered, prevent you from eating well.
And it has impacted us all. And I think, the stats are overwhelming of how many people are affected by disordered eating.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned it's 1 in 9 females, which that's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, it was funny when I was writing this chapter, I found out more people like in my immediate family who hadn't told me before that they had been diagnosed. It's a lot. It's a lot.
No. And it is easy to shame them. It is easy. Like, we're all have these biases, and like, I've been always blessed with a really great metabolism, I haven't always worked out, but like it impacts how I view people, right? Like I have to admit, like, it does, right? Like I need to own that, but also realize like, hey, no, like thinness doesn't always equal health.
Yeah. So my partner's like you, Andrew. He's like a runner. He like whatever. He still eats like he's in college. I think like maybe 5 pounds more than he was when he was in college now. I'm not. I'm like a big bone, and so I think maybe partly that's and I have these women in my life who this affected. There was actually just a great episode. I don't know if you watched The Pit. My family is obsessed with the TV show The Pit, which is about PR setting, and they just did a great episode where someone really large, like I forget how large, what the weight was. Really, really large, shows up in the ER, and the way that one of the like residents is sort of like, "Why are you so like have you tried like?" He's like, "Yeah, I've had this I had this accident and I had these medical problems and like, but there was that immediate sort of judgment from this resident. Like what? Why aren't you like taking care of yourself? So I think that's right. I think we still valorize thinness. I thought, I'm so naive. I thought we were moving away from it a little bit, particularly since there was so much talk about women lifting weights and becoming stronger. And I thought, oh, we've like turned a corner. Finally, my like time is here. Like I'm so
Yeah.
like, lift weight. But then I see like, if you've been watching the red carpet and just the thinness thing is back around. And it's once you have people in your lives who've been like chronically underweight or have a medicalized condition that puts you underweight, it's hard to see celebrities who are so frail being celebrated as like
right.
perfect,
well, even
beautiful, healthy.
Even yeah, and I think you highlighted it, and my wife pointed out to me that Serena Williams, who we applaud as just a beautiful woman who has conquered so much, right? But like she's
literally
using
the best female athlete ever. She's literally the best, yes, ever.
But like it recently came out of her use. I don't even know all the details, and so I don't. But
yeah, her husband owns a GLP. I was on the board of a GLP company, and I don't know if that's why, but she started taking a GLP, and I know her of it through. She did an episode with Oprah Winfrey, and she talks about when I was training, 8 hours a day, I couldn't take the weight off, and I was thinking, but you were so like Serena Williams is who I like held up to my daughter as like, look at this strong, beautiful woman, right?
Right.
Like you don't need to like be skinny and small to be beautiful. But she never felt that way, apparently, right? And so now she's, I don't know how much weight she dropped on this. But the idea that like now we're celebrating like that body that was so strong who could do something that no other body could really ever do is now the before picture.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, and now we're celebrating like, oh, that had to be fixed. It was a problem, had to be fixed. So the food and like sort of tied up with the body image stuff, which is not really, we should talk about eating as well, but like it is all like, it's all like mixed up with the theology, I think, for folks. That makes it hard to get outside of too, right? We really internalize the theology. Yeah.
No, it does. And so I think, so there's lots of problems, but there's also wisdom you mentioned, right? Like wisdom in the food, in the religious world that can actually help us think more holistically.
Yeah.
And so for you, like where has that come into play and what does that look like?
Yeah. So let's start with Ramadan because we're in the middle of Ramadan. We're taping during Ramadan still. We're still like on the week of Ramadan. Because if you think about, so part of toxic diet culture right now is, I think, pushing a lot of like fasting, right? So like real calorie deficits. So fasting is good for you. Or if it's intermittent fasting, or if it's just like, just drinking or whatever, not having food for a couple of days, it's a reset for your body. That's fasting aimed at thinness and this idea of detoxing. So what would food restriction look like in a ritual religious container instead? Because there are lots of religions that do fast for different reasons. And, because we're in the middle of Ramadan, that's one. So, fasting during Ramadan. So it's not that no Muslims in the US, for example, who are fasting during Ramadan aren't also hoping they're going to like drop a couple pounds, because they're also part of American diet culture, right? Yeah. But it's not the goal of Ramadan. No. I would say like the goal is to like lose that extra 5, right? It's about, it's about being really, really aware. I mean, taqwa is what it says in the Quran, being really aware of God, really, and like sort of like a way to like kind of a little bit of like a reset, but in terms of like not like your weight, right? Like your orientation to your faith and to God. And if we think about, so Ramadan's also interesting. Like it's just as much about eating as not eating. So like the breaking of the fast is like a big party. It's like a supper club every night kind of thing, right? It's like really communal. Everyone's like favorite comfort foods, a time of gathering with family and friends. So like there's a way in which it's emphasizing those sort of, really building connections in a way. Versus I think about like food restriction in toxic diet culture is something that's kind of like you're doing yourself, and I'm like on my phone tracking my macros, on my Fitness Pal app or whatever, versus this being very communal. Also the way in which the fasting, if it's not aimed at like thinness and weight loss, can be remaking you in different ways. And so during Ramadan, a lot of it is about trying to make you more generous. So like you're physically feeling hunger during the day. You're going through your day without water or food, but you're still going through your work day. You don't like hang out at home and take a nap, right? That's hardship. And so a way for you to be more empathetic of people who have hardship and be more generous and more altruistic in the world. So it's kind of like training that virtue.
For sure.
Yeah. Or I talk about patience, how it trains the virtue of patience. So I think there's a way of thinking about fasting in that ritual setting, in that communal setting, as a way to work on ourselves, right? And remake ourselves, which is very different than one, aimed at thinness. But also the tradition, like it has space for ease. Like I love this about the way the Quran talks about Ramadan, which is like, yeah, everyone has to fast, except like all these exemptions. Like, no, not if you're pregnant. No, not if you're sick. Like, no, not if you're like a child. No, not if you're like traveling, right? Like, there are other things you could do instead in those cases. Like, right, you could serve food for others. You could read some extra Quranic passages. You could like, pray more, whatever it is, study more. But like, it's an obligation, except it shouldn't be a hardship, right? Like just because something is harder. So it's the idea that like the body is, again, back to that like Catherine of Siena, that like kind of like body dualism we were talking about. Like, the body is bad. No, that's not like what it's like, right? And we think about it in terms of Ramadan, the body's not a problem to be overcome. Being hungry and like is not the virtue. The virtue is the thing that you're using the hunger to train, right?
Right.
And so I love that about it, and I love the exemptions because it creates ease and space. And then another thing I talk about in the book that I also really like is this hadith that a friend of mine, a colleague of mine who teaches at Vassar, Kirsten Wusselhoff, helped me find this hadith. It's such a great one where someone like comes. So hadiths are the things that the prophet said or did, and then we have like firsthand accounts of them, right? So it's kind of very similar to the way the Bible works, right? But we have this whole collection. We have the Quran, which is like the word of God in Islam, like directly. And then we have the hadith, which are the things that the Prophet Muhammad said or did, that it's also like, okay, that's helpful for us understanding what to do as good Muslims, right? And so there's this believer who's like really like leaning into fasting. He's like, if you need me to fast for 30 days, I'm going to keep fasting. I'm going to fast more hours, or I'm going to fast past 30 days. And instead of the prophet being like, that's amazing, he's like, no, stop it. Like, no. Like sometimes fast and sometimes eat. Like that's the point. Sometimes pray, but don't pray all the time. And he has this line where it's like, your body has a right over you. Like you need to also respect that hunger, or the fact, or if I think about my body doesn't want to be 90 pounds. Like that's like not where, my hunger, whatever it is or whatever, I need to eat pasta like for happiness and flourishing maybe. Right. So to really respect the body and not see it as this thing that has to be disciplined so much that you like think of it as a negative and an impediment. So all those kind of things about that communal thing, the importance of eating, like thinking about fasting in a much different way, are some of the lessons that I kind of like learn from seeing communities engaged in Ramadan, and that's real centrality of food, which is so central in so many religious traditions and communities.
Because I interviewed Naeem Fazal, who grew up Muslim, but he talked about the hospitality and the party and the communal aspect of Ramadan, that it was about being together, and it was the celebration, the joy, and not just this, it is the discipline of fasting, but then also the joy of communal eating and being together. And
it's interesting. So this colleague I mentioned at Vassar's doing a research project about Ramadan among New York-based Muslims who are like not particularly religious. So young Muslims were like, don't go to mosque. But they still practice, they still celebrate Ramadan, and they love Ramadan. And she's like, it's partly that it's like hard, and they like that it's a challenge. And then she's like, and also it's partly that it's social. They know if they show up any night in like a Muslim space, there's like a dinner party. And like, just so like, she's just like, it's just like people like look forward to that for that reason as well. And I don't know, I just sort of, I love that, I think that if we think about that bad diet culture as like eating well is like, maybe you're eating in your car or over the kitchen sink, but you're eating by yourself while you're watching Netflix, right? But versus like, how different is that than the sort of communal meal? Or so much of Ramadan is also about feeding others. So people volunteer to like put together, like it's like a big like sort of food pantry sort of like drive sort of moment too. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think that really helps to recalibrate and sort of push back against some of those things we thought were like, oh yeah, we just assumed that was natural to molarize, molar. Sorry, tripping my word. Um, Morality. So and I can't say molarize. Anyway, so to think of
Yeah.
certain foods as good and bad, we just got used to thinking that was okay to do.
Hmm.
Um, versus like, how can food really remake us?
Yeah.
We consume it. It comes like literally goes under our skin,
Yeah.
right? So,
It
like
becomes us.
it becomes us, right? So there's that savoring part of it. There's the communal part of it. There's a sacrifice. All these different dimensions and ways in which food can like, you know, um, change us. So that's a much
Yeah.
more fun way to think about food, I think. Yeah.
Because you asked the question is like, what forms of social and environmental responsibility do I want my diet to reflect?
Yeah.
And like, even if, my listeners aren't Muslim, it's like, how is my eating habits helping me engage further with others and with my environment? Ecological issues, social issues, hunger issues. Like, as we think about moralizing food, like this is good, this is bad, like, you know, okay, that's fine for us white folks living in suburban where we have access
Right.
to
For
clean
whole food,
vegetables. Yeah.
right.
Whereas, I live in Flagstaff, Arizona. We're right near the Navajo reservation.
Yeah.
And you talk about food deserts and do they have, access to
Yeah.
to good food,
Yeah.
and it's not just in Flagstaff. This is, across the country, the, food deserts, and so like even just thinking about like moralizing food of like eat this, not that, like does that take into account, you know, people of different socioeconomic standards or in people who are working multiple jobs just to make ends meet and just trying to get a dinner on the table for their family, um, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, right. Instead of thinking about food being like categories of food or food items being good or
yeah,
bad, let's think about morality and ethics and food in a different way. So like
yeah,
again, if it doesn't have to be Ramadan, it could just be something as simple as like, okay, I really care about, you know, environmental or good food production, or I really want to support local farmers through a CSA, or I really want to like think about how to volunteer on the reservation nearby in terms of like helping or come up with a project that will help them, get more fresh fruits and vegetables into that. Like I sort of have a social justice interest that
yeah,
can combine with my interest in food in the way that I consume food or I help other people consume food. Like all these things can be vehicles of like operationalizing our core values if we know what they are. And
hmm,
I think that's what's so great about the way religions think about eating, right? Like they're like, okay, religions are trying to make us into certain people. And then the traditions of cooking or the foods we eat on holidays or the communal parts of it or whatever.
yeah,
Again, you could combine it with something like a Christian idea of stewardship. So like eating well and stewardship of the earth, like what does that look like,
right,
right? Does it mean growing your own food? Does it mean supporting local? Do you feel are part of your core values about animals? So you don't want to eat
yeah,
animal protein, based protein. And that's like not a one size fits all, which is
no,
also what I like about it. So what is important to you? Use
mm,
food for that, right?
yeah, yeah. Like what works for my family may not work
Yeah,
for you, and where I live, like, you
yeah,
know, I live in the mountains where we have growing seasons that, aren't always long and so it's, whereas if you live in Los Angeles and, you have farmers market 24/7, it's just different, and I think, yeah, again, that one size fits all doesn't help me
yeah.
make sense of my current standard, my current way of being.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of talk. I hear a lot of talk right now about sort of the loneliness epidemic
Hmm.
that we're all living through, and so everyone feeling isolated. So again, thinking about how food can be like I'm not being that good about this right now because I'm so busy. But my sort of resolution this year was like, I need to have more dinner parties again.
Yeah.
My daughter's going off to college next year. We have
Mm,
time. We'll have time for it. I need to just start gathering people and giving them food because
yeah.
that's how we made friends and how we created community after college. And now,
Yeah.
I need to start doing that again because I think that
Hmm.
is really it's how I want to be social, and I think it's like just an easy way to like yeah to form community.
And especially across different lines where we wouldn't normally associate, because I think there is power in a shared humanity across the table that doesn't happen in other places. Like when we eat together, across religious lines, across political divides, like something slowly melts away so that we see each other as more human versus as our enemies that need to be destroyed.
Yeah, and I think it's the way we can share part of ourselves too, right? I think it's a great tradition we had, my partner's roommates had in college. They called them Friday night feasts because they happened to have access to a kitchen. So they'd host it and someone would cook some food from, that was important to them. Like maybe it was, it was we had, the first time I ever had Ethiopian food was that at a Friday night feast, right? So maybe it was some cultural food, or maybe it was some special meal that they really missed from home. And then, we'd share it on paper plates. And it was just like sort of this lovely way to like learn about people and how food was part of home for them that they weren't getting there. Yeah.
Yeah. Because food tells a deep story, like the recipe is more than just a recipe. Like there's a story behind it. That helps us understand each other. And, and even, and as you were talking, I was thinking, one of my favorite biblical passages is like Luke 24, where Jesus is walking along the road to Emmaus with the two disciples, and they don't recognize Jesus until he enters their home and breaks bread. And they're like, in the breaking of bread, Jesus is recognized. And this is post-resurrection. And so, Jesus still eats post-resurrection, which I think a lot of Christians need to think through what that means. But I think, in recognizing, for me, I may see Jesus in another person when we break bread. Like I'm not Jesus to them. They may actually be Jesus to me in ways I never imagined because we took the time to break bread.
That's interesting. Interesting thinking about how then food and communal eating and breaking bread together is a way to do the thing that we talked about early on, which is like to decenter ourselves and realize that we're not God, or we're not the only character in this story, and that we're not isolated, and that the more we try to like pursue our own quote happiness and whatever, longevity or optimization or peak performance, whatever, in isolation, the more we're likely to be doomed, right? Because it's just that's not the way humans work. The
decentering of ourselves are, I say this on the podcast, I feel like almost every episode of Henry Nouwen is my favorite hospitality definer, because he says hospitality is the creating of a free space for another person to become who they were meant to be. And so I think that's what it is, of like, it's a decentering of myself and not focusing on my optimization, but how do I approach the table? Like if you and I were sharing, what does Liz need this evening to become more fully Liz? And if we share that attitude, we actually find out we actually become better ourselves. Like, we optimize ourselves versus, by de-optimizing and decentering ourselves, I think, in hospitality.
That's, so just, I'm doing this hospice volunteer training right now, and we were talking about some ethical issues. One of them is like, if you go somewhere and you're a visitor and you're visiting the hospice patient and the family offers you food, you're supposed to say no. And we had this whole conversation about like, I mean, I will say no, but then if they insist, and it's an important part of the way that that not so much they want to show maybe they want to show appreciation, but it's just how they want to interact with you, right? They want to have a meal with you. They want you to share the meal. It's, some cases that might be appropriate and not, I don't want you to think you have to like serve me a 4-course meal, but like, I'll sit here and have a cup of coffee and like, a cookie with you and like, or break, have a snack with you, because that's partly how you want me to connect with you, or how you feel comfortable connecting with me. It's interesting to think about like food in that setting as well. Lovely.
No, there's so much to unpack with food, I think, in, various religious traditions. I focus obviously on the Christian tradition, but I really appreciate what you were saying about Ramadan and just giving us a fuller picture, because it is the season of Ramadan. It's the season of Lent, and what is Lent? How is Lent helping us engage at the table, but engage with others? I think, again, Lent's never about just me and Jesus. It's about, okay, how do I engage others as I think about Easter?
And then I wonder, I don't know if we have time to talk about it, but it might be nice, another counterexample is to talk about the Ayurvedic example in the chapter, only because it helps do some pushing back against the food categories that we're so used to. So partly what I realized when I was writing this book was I was like, I got to go find some examples of food that are so really far away from the Christian examples. So part of what I wanted to do is find some like explicitly like non-Christian traditions to look at and see how do they talk about food beyond that sort of more. I'm like blanking. So I wanted to find some Christian traditions that would like think about food beyond categories of good and bad and beyond sort of, and also think about ways to think about food that are beyond sort of like nutrition as macros and stuff, right? Like real nourishing, not just nutrition, but real nourishing. So I looked at Ayurvedic because it's very non-Western. It's doesn't have any sort of basis in Christianity or Abrahamic religions. It's based in Vedic religion, so like traditions that like predate even Hinduism. And they think about food in a really sort of complex, complicated way. And the one thing that's really helpful for me is thinking about doshas that we all have. There's 3 doshas. There's Pitta, Vata, and Kapha, and we all have all 3. But some of us were born with more than one. We have a particular constitution. So I'm a Pitta constitution, which just means I digest really well, but I also tend to be, it affects like your personality. I tend to be like kind of aggressive and, it affects like sort of like what ailments you have as well. So you're kind of born a certain way, but everyone has all 3. And the way the tradition thinks about food is that, as you go through life, you want your doshas balanced, but they become unbalanced because of stress, because of the season, whatever it is. And food is the medicine to help with that balance, right? And it's not that like kale is always good medicine for everyone. Kale might be good medicine for me now, cooked a certain way with certain spices. And then in 2 months, it may not be kale anymore, right? So I love that about it, right? So there's not good and bad food. There's thinking about balance and how to create balance. And that, it's not a one size fits all. And it's just a bigger way of thinking about food beyond these categories of good and bad. And also just the idea of like, how is food really nourishing and really healing beyond thinness, peak performance, and so that tradition is really, and I talk about that in the book as well, sort of like going in more detail, like what would that look like to think about food that way. So I really enjoyed that sort of deep dive as well.
I lived in China for 3 years, and the Chinese have the way of, balancing a meal, like the right ordering of dishes to balance hot, cold, and not just temperature. It's, dispositions, like you said. And so,
right. Hot, cold isn't just about temperature, or like astringent isn't, it's a taste, but it's not, it's also like a quality of the food, right? Like, so an egg, we always talk about the eggs in Ayurvedic. So like a hard-boiled egg is different than a scrambled egg, they say. So sometimes they're like, you should not eat hard-boiled eggs right now, Liz, because if you're imbalances, you can only eat scrambled eggs. To me, I'm like, it's an egg, but no, it's not an egg. So thinking about that, I love that as a way of thinking about food a little differently too.
Yeah, because it takes it out of the nutrition aspect of in terms of balance and okay, how do I bring harmony? And what's needed for my soul right now.
And how that changes. It changes seasonally. It changes on what's going on other parts of your life. Like maybe you just need to be eating more chocolate right now because that is like, it's like Harry Potter and the Dementors. We need the thing. That's like, there's nothing, maybe you're craving sugar for a reason. There's a reason that your body needs sugar. What is the imbalance right now? That's like, oh, I just want a bag of Oreos. And so also thinking about it that way too. And then again, like what foods do I eat right now to help me with the balance? And there's no perfect diet. And you don't, and it changes and it's not the same for everybody. So also thinking about food as like that kind of like, partner and sort of flourishing.
No, and the aspects of disgust that are all wrapped up in food and diet, like it's all, there's so much to unpack. And that's where I love the table is to, we're talking about food, but we're also talking about more than food and what does it mean to be human and who are we in this moment of life and how do we use the wisdom from years and centuries ago to help us make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going back to Brian Johnson again, because I think about him as a particular brotastic, celebrity, like, so like, I have the best biomarkers of anybody. And I think about what his day looks like. And again, I think about the idea that he doesn't eat after 11 and he rarely eats with other people because he eats this very sort of controlled diet. And I think, so if Brian Johnson gets an extra 10 years or 5 years, did he live a better life? Because for me, food, I talk to my trainer about this all the time. I'm like, I'm happy to lift more weights. I'm not going to eat less food.
No,
Like,
right.
I just like love food. I love
Yeah.
cooking for people. I enjoy food. I think so much of it is like, I don't want the 5 years. So, if Brian Johnson spends the next 40 years eating by himself, stopping
Right.
at 11, always feeling hunger. And I don't just mean like hunger. I mean like hunger for something.
Yeah.
Yeah. A bigger hunger. That's not well-being to me. That's
No.
not the life I'm like looking for. So yeah, I think you're right. I think it's like, it's a lot more than, it's more than nutrition. It's really nourishing us on a much bigger scale. So
It is. Yeah.
yeah.
Again, our conversation keeps bringing up things I think about long ago of MFK Fisher, who was a writer in the 20th, a famous food writer in the 20th century, wrote, right after World War II, and people would always ask her like, hey, why are you writing about food when we've just come through such horrific experiences? And she's like, she ties it beautifully, and it's a great quote, but like, she's like, in writing about food, I'm writing about love and, all these other aspects, because, and then she ends this passage with, in the breaking of bread, there is communion of more than just bodies. And so like she saw in the midst of all the upheaval of World War II that what might be needed is us to think about food and to gather around a table. And I don't think it's a cure-all, right? There, we need good policy, but if we can slow down enough just to eat well together.
Yeah.
And sometimes that might mean macaroni and cheese and dino nuggets with our kids,
Right. Right.
And that's okay,
Yeah. Right. I think the concern, I think especially around kids nutrition, right? The like pressure, parents feel like to do it right, and that you're somehow like failing your kids if you get them a frozen pizza, because it's like a Thursday night. Like everyone will survive that. I survived frozen pizzas as a kid. I still love my vegetables now. It's okay.
Right.
I love those frozen pizzas. Yeah. I did not try to not have it be perfection all the time either. So yeah, I love that. I think too, it's interesting. We were sort of a little bit dumping on Americans not knowing how to eat well. But then I think about Thanksgiving, and I think about how that is my kids, hands down, that is her favorite holiday, right? Like that's the thing we never miss with the family, and we have to eat the same things. And it's like, and so there, we do know that like eating together and breaking bread together is important. We just haven't figured out how to like, how many families actually sit down and can figure out how to like eat dinner every night together? We do that as a family, I think, and it involves us. It's a big lift. That means we have to have dinner on the table exactly at 6:00 when the super hangry, like high school athlete comes home, and it means I have to stop working 30 minutes earlier than I normally would. And it's a lift. And I have friends I know who don't get home until 8:00, and they can't eat all together. So how hard have we created an entire like? This is all capitalism's fault now too, right? We created an entire like life work imbalance that makes part of this really hard for families.
It does.
And so that would also be radical. Like, what would it mean that we have one meal together every day with someone in our family? Like that is itself radical and would involve really reorganizing a lot of our lives.
Yep.
Yeah.
So much more we could probably talk about.
Probably. But it's lunchtime, so we're hungry.
And so some fun questions to end that I love asking my guests. What's one food you refuse to eat?
Ooh, I don't like tripe.
Okay, that's fair.
In fact, I had people over for dinner a couple weeks ago, and she's like, I eat everything but tripe. And I was like, and oysters. I was like, I was not serving tripe, like stuffed oysters to you, but whatever. I don't like raw oysters either. Oh, I'm a weird. I don't like. Yeah, so those are two things. I don't like raw oysters and tripe.
All right. Well,
but I eat most things.
I thought we could be friends.
What do you not eat, Andrew? What is your no?
It used to be chicken kidneys. I got served in China, like in a village, chicken kidneys, and they were just the texture. But then I learned like the honor we were served by chicken kidneys, and so like it's that again like. Oh no, like a lot of chickens had to die for us to eat a plate of chicken kidneys. Yeah, right. And so it's an expensive, it's a show of honor. Yeah. But it was still hard
to do. Yeah.
To do.
Yeah.
So on the other end, what's one of the best things you've ever eaten?
One of the best things I've ever eaten?
Yeah.
So Iran is in the news right now, and I did field
Okay.
work in Iran. And I love Iranian food. It's a really great, it's like comfort food. It's a really great combination of like meat, but also fruits. And they have something called gourmet sabzi, which is like, sabzi is like greens and vegetables. It's like a stew.
Yeah.
And I think that's like one of my favorite like sort of dishes. If I can get
Mm.
like someone who like really knows how to make Persian food to make. But I mean, like I love everything. Give me
Yeah,
something sweet and I'm happy
for sure. I
for sure.
understand.
But a gourmet sabzi, there you go. That's probably
There's,
different than you've gotten before.
yeah, no, I love it.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's usually involves some travel. I found that
yeah,
my guests, it's something. And
yeah.
finally, there's a conversation among chefs about last meals, as in if you knew you
Oh,
only had one more meal left to enjoy, what would it be? So if Liz had one last meal, what might be on her table?
so I don't know what I eat as important as who I eat it with.
Yep.
So I don't know that I know what would be on the plate, but I can start to name off people I'd love to have in the room.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm thinking too, like, sort of as I'm thinking, working more into life stuff, not a lot of hunger then sometimes, right?
Yeah.
But like, who do you want in the room? I think to be
Yeah.
breaking the bread with you. I
For
think
sure.
that's so like, thinking about like my immediate family and my,
Hmm.
sisters and which friends I'd want to have there. Or ideally who I'd want to have there who's maybe passed on or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I would answer that question.
No, I love it. It brings us back full circle of, how we eat is more important than what we eat.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. Yeah.
Well, Liz, I've really enjoyed this. I appreciate the opportunity. If people are interested in your work, where can they find you?
Yeah, so the best thing to do is to order my book Beyond
Yes.
Wellness. The best place to find that is just on my website. So I'm at Liz Bucar, my name, LizBucar.com. My book Beyond Wellness, it's out April 28th. So that's like where my like deepest best thinking is.
Yeah.
And then if you're someone who likes to read Substacks, I'm write a Substack called Religion Reimagined. So you can find me there. And I'm on Instagram and a little bit on TikTok at Liz Bucar.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do order the book, pre-order the book. Beyond Wellness is going to be available wherever you find your books, but buy it from an
Yeah.
indie bookstore if possible.
Yeah. I've got links to everything on my website.
Yeah.
You can pick your poison there.
Awesome.
Pick your favorite.
And if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with others. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Biggest Table, where we explore what it means to be transformed by God's love around the table and through food. Until next time, bye.